Why was she sitting alone on the tarmac that morning? That question had an answer most people never bothered to look for. Captain Meredith Callahan occupied a patch of desert shade near the flight line, legs crossed, flight helmet beside her, a green kneeboard balanced on her lap. Around her, the compound hummed with the noise of men preparing for another day in hell. Laughter from the chow hall. The metallic scrape of boots on concrete. Somewhere, a diesel generator coughed and settled into its steady rhythm. But she sat apart from all of it, not because she wanted to be alone, because alone was where they had decided she belonged. Her pencil moved across the kneeboard in neat, precise strokes. Numbers filled the margins. Calculations that would mean nothing to anyone who glanced at them. Canon harmonics at different airspeeds. Fuel burn calculations worked by hand in case avionics failed. How the GAU-8 Avenger breathed differently on hot days versus cold. She was smaller than most, barely clearing 5'3" in her flight boots. 115 pounds soaking wet, the instructors at flight school used to joke. But those same instructors stopped laughing when they saw her scores, when they watched her fly profiles that made bigger pilots white-knuckle their sticks. Where other pilots carried swagger like a second uniform, she radiated something different. Control. Focus. The quiet intensity of someone who had learned long ago that attention was earned through performance, not volume. Two lance corporals strolled past on their way to the barracks, young men with the loose confidence of those who had never been tested. One of them glanced at her, then nudged his companion with an elbow. "There's the quota pilot," the other snorted, "paper pilot. Lucky cardboard doesn't pull triggers." They did not slow down, they did not expect a response. Why would they? She was furniture, background noise, a checkbox on some bureaucrat's diversity report. Meredith did not look up. Her pencil kept moving, adding another line to her notes. She had heard it all before. Dead weight, mascot, checkbox pilot, too small, too quiet, too different. The words had lost their sting through sheer repetition. Even hardened sergeants with 3 deployments shrugged her off as an administrative asset, someone to handle paperwork and stay out of the way. First Sergeant Dale Pruitt had said it plainly to the operations officer just last week, not caring that she was within earshot. Callahan's fine for simulator work. Keep her on support. Let her handle comms and gear runs. Don't need her complicating actual operations. And so they did. Logistics, equipment transport, communications checks, the kind of duties that kept her busy without letting her anywhere near the real fight. No one sent her up the ridgelines. No one asked her to bring the warthog's teeth to bear on actual targets. She was politely, firmly, repeatedly told to stay in her lane, the lane they had assigned her, not the lane she had earned. But what they never realized, because they never bothered to look, was that Meredith Callahan had built her own flight program in the quiet of long nights. While others traded jokes in the smoke pit, she spread sectional charts under a red lens flashlight in her quarters. The red light preserved her night vision, a habit drilled into her during training, now applied to solitary study sessions that stretched past midnight. She memorized terrain features and canyon cuts until the maps lived inside her head. Every ridgeline, every draw, every saddle between peaks where wind currents changed direction. The topography of the region became as familiar as the streets of her hometown. She tracked wind shifts and rotor currents, noting how gusts changed at different times of day and across different valleys. Morning thermals versus afternoon crosswinds. The way dust devils formed on certain slopes. The patterns that would affect bullet trajectories and bomb release points. She ran simulated gun runs and dry-fire drills in the base simulator until her inputs were steady as a metronome. The simulator technicians noticed her logging extra hours but said nothing. She was not breaking any rules. She was just using equipment that would otherwise sit idle. And in her little green kneeboard, the one that looked like a grocery list to anyone who glanced at it, she wrote everything down. Weapon employment tables copied from classified manuals and committed to memory. Approach angles for terrain she had never officially been assigned to study. Escape routes and emergency landing zones mapped out for valleys she might never fly over. Her private doctrine, unseen by those convinced she had none. Hidden under her flight sleeve was a small tattoo, pilot wings with a tiny warthog silhouette beneath them. Most people never saw it. She kept that sleeve low, the fabric pulled down past her wrist regardless of the heat. The tattoo was not decoration. It was a mark earned through sweat and precision at the advanced training school at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, a school that punished hesitation and demanded perfection on every run, where instructors washed out candidates for mistakes that would be forgiven elsewhere. She had graduated at the top of her class, but here in this compound full of men who had already decided she did not belong, there was no point in showing it. No point in reminding them that she had flown profiles other pilots refused to attempt, that her gunnery scores set records that still stood, that the call sign stitched to her helmet represented something they had never bothered to investigate. Viper 206, a call sign whispered in training rooms and instructor lounges, attached to impossible low and slow runs that other pilots called suicide profiles. Uncanny accuracy that made experienced weapons officers double-check their scoring equipment. A legend formed in classrooms and simulator bays, now buried under logistics paperwork in a desert compound where legends went to die. Her father had given her the foundation, a small-town sheriff in rural Montana who believed his daughter deserved the same lessons as any son. He taught her to shoot on cold mornings when frost still clung to fence posts. Steady breath, ease the trigger, let the shot surprise you. He taught her patience, how to wait for the right moment instead of forcing it, how to see what others missed because they were too busy talking to notice. He had been a Marine himself, Vietnam, tour. He never talked about what he had seen there, but sometimes late at night she would wake to find him sitting on the porch, staring at stars that looked nothing like the stars over those old jungles. He wore his dog tags until the day he died. A heart attack at 53. Sudden, brutal, unfair. She wore those dog tags now, tucked beneath her flight suit, tapping against her chest with every step. A reminder of where she came from. A reminder that some men understood what she was capable of, even if most never would. The compound sat in a bowl of ancient stone, surrounded by ridgelines that channeled wind and funneled sound in strange ways. At certain hours, you could hear distant fighting as clearly as if it were happening in the next valley over. The thump of mortars, the chatter of machine guns, the low rumble of explosions that vibrated through rock and dust. It was a geography designed for ambush, for killing, for trapping the unwary in dead-end valleys where escape was measured in blood. The Marines knew this. They moved through the terrain with careful respect, understanding that arrogance here meant body bags. But respect only went so far when the enemy knew the ground better than you did, when they had been fighting in these mountains for generations, when every ridge and every canyon was soaked in the memory of previous battles, previous victories, previous defeats. Meredith understood this too. She had studied the terrain not just as a pilot, but as a student of violence. She knew where the kill zones were, where the approaches narrowed, where fire could be concentrated to maximum effect. She knew because she had spent months mapping it all, committing it to memory, preparing for a mission she had never been assigned, preparing for a moment that protocol said would never come. But there was something she knew that the others did not. Something she had learned from her father on those cold Montana mornings. That preparation was not about certainty. It was about readiness. And readiness meant being ready for the moment when everything went wrong. What does it sound like when 540 men realize they are about to die? The radio traffic started normal enough. Routine patrol chatter, grid coordinates, movement reports, the familiar cadence of professionals doing dangerous work with practiced calm. But then the tone shifted, subtle at first, a hesitation in someone's voice, a request for clarification that carried an edge. Then the first contact report came through, clipped and urgent, followed by the sound that every soldier knows and every pilot dreads, the sound of a firefight spiraling out of control. Meredith was in the operations center when it happened, a concrete bunker lit by the glow of monitors and the flicker of radio displays. She was not supposed to be there. Her assigned duty that day was inventory management, checking supply manifests. but she had developed a habit of lingering near the operations center during patrol windows, staying close to the radios, listening, learning, absorbing the rhythm of combat even when she was not allowed to participate. The voice on the radio belonged to Lieutenant Braddock, a Marine officer leading a reinforced company through a valley the maps called Black Ridge. The mission was supposed to be straightforward: patrol, observe, report, standard reconnaissance in a region that had been quiet for weeks. But quiet in these mountains was never a promise. It was just the enemy holding their breath. Contact, heavy contact. We are taking fire from multiple positions. Braddock's voice was steady, but beneath the steadiness was something else. The recognition that the situation was bad and getting worse. The operations center came alive. Officers leaned over maps. Radio operators adjusted frequencies. Someone called for air support. Someone else requested artillery. The machine of military response began to turn, grinding through procedures and protocols that had been designed in air-conditioned offices far from the sound of bullets tearing through flesh. Colonel Hayes stood at the center of it all, a career officer with 3 decades of experience and the kind of face that revealed nothing. He listened to the reports. He studied the maps. He issued orders in a calm, measured tone that suggested control even as control was slipping away. But Meredith, standing in the back of the room where no one paid attention to her, saw what others missed. She saw the way Hayes's jaw tightened, the way his eyes moved across the terrain map, searching for options that were not there, the way his hand hesitated before reaching for the radio handset. Black Ridge was a kill box, a narrow valley with high walls and limited exits, the kind of terrain that turned a patrol into a slaughter if the enemy had time to set up properly. And the enemy had set up properly. Meredith could hear it in the radio traffic: coordinated fire from elevated positions, mortars landing with precision that spoke of pre-plotted targets, machine guns interlocking fields of fire. This was not a chance encounter. This was an ambush, planned, rehearsed, executed with the kind of skill that only came from experience and patience. "We need air support now." Braddock's voice again, no longer steady, now carrying the unmistakable sound of a man watching his Marines die. "We are pinned down, taking casualties. Cannot maneuver. Repeat, we cannot maneuver." Hayes called for the duty pilots, 2 warthogs on standby, 2 experienced pilots who had flown dozens of close air support missions. They were scrambled immediately, engines spooling up, pilots running to their aircraft. The sound of salvation preparing to launch. But then came the problem that changed everything: weather. A front had moved in from the west, unexpected and fast. Clouds were dropping into the valleys. Visibility was degrading. The kind of conditions that grounded aircraft and killed pilots who tried to fly through them anyway. The duty pilots reported it from their cockpits: ceiling too low, visibility below minimums. Cannot safely operate in the valley. Request permission to hold until conditions improve. Hayes stared at the map. 540 Marines trapped in a valley, an enemy force with the high ground and the initiative. Whether that made air support impossible. The calculus was brutal and simple: wait for the weather to clear, and there would be no one left to save. Send pilots into conditions they could not fly in, and you would lose the pilots along with the Marines. Protocol was clear. In these conditions, aircraft do not fly. Regulations existed for a reason. They were written in the blood of pilots who had tried to be heroes and instead became cautionary tales. Hayes made the decision: air support is scrubbed. Ground units, hold your positions. Air support will launch when conditions improve. The words hung in the operations center like a death sentence, because everyone in that room knew what those words meant. Hold your position. Wait. Hope the enemy runs out of ammunition before you run out of Marines. Hope the weather clears before the valley becomes a graveyard. Hope that hope means something in a place where hope was just another word for waiting to die. Meredith felt something tighten in her chest, a familiar sensation, the feeling she got when she knew something was wrong, when her instincts screamed at her that the answer everyone was accepting was the wrong answer. She had felt it before, in training, in simulators. In every situation where the safe choice was also the choice that led to failure. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes the right thing is not the easy thing. Sometimes doing your duty means ignoring the rules that tell you not to. She stepped forward, one step, then another, moving through the operations center toward the map table where Hayes and his staff were studying terrain that offered no good options. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Hayes looked up. Annoyance flashed across his face. He did not have time for interruptions, especially not from a pilot who was not supposed to be in the operations center in the first place. "Captain Callahan, unless you have inventory reports, this is not the time." She ignored the dismissal. "Sir, I can fly that mission." The room went silent, every head turned. Officers stared at her like she had spoken a language they did not understand. Hayes's annoyance shifted to something else. Disbelief, maybe anger. "The weather is below minimums, Captain. The duty pilots cannot fly in these conditions. With respect, sir, I know that valley. I have studied the terrain. I have mapped the approaches. I can fly low enough to stay under the weather. I can navigate by terrain reference. I can provide the support those Marines need." Hayes's expression hardened. His voice dropped to the tone officers used when they wanted to make something very clear. "Captain, you are not rated for combat operations in this theater. You are assigned to logistics and support. This is not your mission." But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of desperation, because he knew what she knew, that every minute spent arguing was another minute those Marines spent dying. That protocol was perfect until it failed, and protocol was failing right now. "Sir, with respect." She held his gaze, did not look away, did not flinch. "Those are Marines in that valley, and I am a pilot. That is all that should matter." Hayes stared at her for a long moment. Around them, the operations center held its breath. Radios crackled with distant gunfire. Somewhere in Black Ridge Valley, men were fighting for their lives while officers debated procedures. Then Hayes shook his head slowly, a gesture of refusal, of finality. "I cannot authorize this, Captain. The risk is too high. The regulations are clear. You are not flying this mission." Meredith felt something shift inside her, a choice forming in the space between what was ordered and what was necessary, a choice that would define everything that came after. She snapped to attention, saluted. "Yes, sir." Then she turned and walked out of the operations center. Hayes watched her go, relief visible on his face. The problem had been handled. The difficult decision had been made. Protocol had been followed. But he did not see what Meredith saw. He did not understand what she understood, that some decisions could not be made in air-conditioned bunkers by men studying maps. Some decisions could only be made by the people who had to live with the consequences. And Meredith had already made hers. Have you ever made a decision that you knew would cost you everything? That moment when you understand there is no going back, no explanation that will satisfy, no defense that will protect you. When the only choice left is between who you are and who they want you to be. Meredith walked across the compound toward the flight line. Her pace was steady, unhurried. To anyone watching, she looked like a pilot heading to her aircraft for routine pre-flight. Just another day, just another task. But beneath that calm exterior, her heart was hammering, not from fear, from clarity, from the absolute certainty that what she was about to do was right, even though it was also wrong, even though it would end her career, even though it might end her life. The warthog sat on the tarmac like a patient predator, ugly, brutal, beautiful in its single-minded purpose. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, built around a cannon that could shred tanks. Designed to fly low and slow and absorb punishment that would kill any other aircraft. To bring death to enemies and salvation to friendlies. It was not just her aircraft. It was an extension of her nervous system. She had logged each tweak like scripture, memorized the machine's moods and rhythms until flying it felt less like operating equipment and more like inhabiting a second body. She began her pre-flight check, methodical, precise. Every panel, every seal, every system checked twice because checking once was never enough. Fuel full, ammunition full. The GAU-8 loaded with high-explosive incendiary rounds that would turn enemy positions into clouds of fire and shrapnel. Countermeasures loaded. Flares and chaff ready to deploy against surface-to-air missiles. Every system green. Every gauge reading nominal. The aircraft was ready. Question was whether she was ready for what came next. She climbed into the cockpit, the seat molded to her body. The controls fell under her hands with the familiarity of old friends. She strapped in, tightened the harnesses until they bit into her shoulders, secured her helmet and adjusted the oxygen mask. Outside, the compound continued its routines. Marines moving between buildings, vehicles rumbling past. No one paid attention to a single pilot preparing a single aircraft. Why would they? She had done this 100 times before. Routine checks, routine procedures, nothing to see here. But this was not routine. She ran through the startup sequence. Systems coming online one by one. The familiar whine of hydraulics pressurizing, the steady hum of electronics warming up. She keyed her radio to the tower frequency. Tower Viper 206, request engine start. The tower controller responded immediately, his voice casual, unaware. Viper 206 tower, you are cleared for engine start. Confirm maintenance run only. She hesitated. 1 second, 2 seconds. The lie would be easy. Yes, maintenance run, just testing systems. Nothing unusual, but lies had weight. They accumulated, they changed you. And if she was going to do this, she was going to do it honestly. Tower Viper 206, negative on maintenance run. I am launching for Black Ridge Valley to provide close air support. Silence on the radio. Then the controller's voice came back, confused, uncertain. Viper 206, say again. You are not on the flight schedule. Repeat, you are not authorized for launch. I understand, Tower, but I am launching anyway. Another silence. Longer this time. She could imagine the chaos erupting in the tower. The controller calling the operations center. Officers scrambling to understand what was happening. Hayes grabbing a radio handset, fury and disbelief warring across his face. Viper 206, this is Colonel Hayes. You are ordered to shut down your aircraft immediately. You are not authorized for this mission. Do not take off. Repeat, do not take off. She pressed the ignition. The engines roared to life. The sound of controlled explosions channeled into thrust. The Warthog vibrated beneath her, eager, ready, waiting only for her command. Sir, with respect, there are Marines dying in that valley, and I am the only pilot who can reach them. This is insubordination, Captain. If you launch, you will face court-martial. You will lose everything, I understand, sir. The acceptance in her voice was complete, total. She had weighed the cost and decided it was worth paying. Because some things mattered more than careers, more than regulations, more than the approval of men who had never believed in her anyway. Viper 206, you are ordered to remain on the ground. This is a direct order. I am sorry, sir, but no. The radio exploded with voices, orders, threats, demands. She switched frequencies, left them all behind, tuned her radio to the frequency where Marines were dying, where Lieutenant Braddock was calling for support that had been denied, where men were bleeding out in the dust because protocol said the weather was too bad to fly. She advanced the throttles. The Warthog began to roll. Behind her, she imagined the scene in the tower, officers shouting, someone probably running toward the flight line, but they were too late. She was already moving, already committed, already crossing the line that separated the obedient from the insubordinate. She rotated off the runway, the aircraft lifted, gear coming up, flaps retracting. The compound falling away beneath her as she climbed into weather that every regulation said she should not be flying in. The clouds swallowed her almost immediately, gray murk pressing against the canopy, visibility dropping to nothing, the kind of conditions that disoriented pilots, that turned sky and ground into an indistinguishable mass, that killed people who relied on their eyes instead of their instruments. But Meredith did not rely on her eyes. She relied on preparation, on memory, on hundreds of hours spent studying maps and terrain and wind patterns. She relied on the kneeboard strapped to her leg, filled with notes that no one else had bothered to write. She dropped lower, hugging the deck, flying at altitudes that made her altimeter scream warnings. But below the worst of the weather, visibility improved slightly. Not great, but enough. Enough to see ridgelines, enough to navigate by reference to terrain she had memorized. Enough to thread through valleys that were supposed to be impossible to fly through. The radio crackled. Viper 206, this is Lieutenant Braddock. Did I hear correct? Are you inbound? Her voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone who had already made peace with whatever came next. Affirm, Braddock. Viper 206 is 5 minutes out. Be ready to mark your position. There was a pause. Then Braddock's voice came back, and for the first time that day it carried something other than desperation. It carried hope. Copy that, Viper. We are marking position now. And ma'am. Waited, thank you. She did not respond. There was nothing to say. Thank you was for after, if there was an after. Right now there was only the mission, only the valley ahead. Only 540 Marines who needed her to be better than she had ever been before. She adjusted her heading, checked her fuel, verified her weapons systems one more time. Everything green, everything ready. The clouds thinned slightly as she approached the valley mouth. Through gaps in the murk she caught glimpses of terrain. Dark rock. Steep walls. The narrow corridor that was Black Ridge Valley. And somewhere ahead, hidden in that maze of stone and cloud, men were fighting for their lives. Men who had called her dead weight, men who had mocked her, men who had never given her a chance. She was about to give them one anyway, because that was what duty meant. Not following orders, not obeying protocol, but doing what was right when right and wrong were separated by nothing more than courage and consequence. The valley opened before her. And Meredith Callahan flew into hell. Can you hear it? That sound, low at first, almost lost beneath the chaos of gunfire and explosions, then growing, building, a deep guttural roar that vibrated through the valley walls, the sound of something massive moving through the air at impossible speeds, the sound of salvation wrapped in titanium and hate. Lieutenant Braddock heard it first. He was pressed against a boulder, rifle empty, radio clutched in one bloody hand. Around him, his Marines fought with everything they had left. Ammunition running low. Casualties mounting. The enemy fire was relentless, disciplined, professional. This was not some ragtag militia. This was a force that knew how to kill and was very good at it. He had accepted it. Accepted that this was where his story ended. That this dusty valley would be his grave and the graves of everyone he had led here. But then he heard that sound, and something changed in his chest. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Viper 206, I have visual on your smoke, beginning my run. Braddock looked up. Through the haze of dust and gun smoke, through clouds that hung like a shroud over the valley, he saw it. A shadow moving low, so low he could not understand how it was flying at all. Then the shadow resolved into shape, into purpose, into the most beautiful aircraft he had ever seen. The Warthog appeared through the murk like a ghost made solid, flying at an altitude that seemed impossible. Weaving between terrain features with precision that looked less like piloting and more like telepathy. The kind of flying that should not be possible. That broke every rule about minimum altitudes and safety margins. That required not just skill but absolute confidence in your aircraft and absolute mastery of the terrain. Meredith saw the battlefield laid out below her like a diagram. Smoke markers where the Marines had marked their positions. Muzzle flashes showing where the enemy was concentrated. Terrain features she had memorized now rendered in brutal reality. The enemy had positioned themselves perfectly. High ground, overlapping fields of fire, covered approaches. The Marines were trapped in a kill box with no way out. It was a tactical masterpiece, and she was about to dismantle it. She rolled inverted, pulled the nose around, lined up on the first enemy position. Her hands moved with muscle memory so deep it had become instinct. Throttle, stick, rudder, every input precise, every adjustment calculated. She activated the gun. The GAU-8 Avenger opened up. 70 rounds per second, each round a 13 piece of hate that could punch through armor like paper. The sound was biblical, a metallic roar that echoed off the valley walls. A sound that made the earth shake and the air vibrate. A sound that every grunt called beautiful and every enemy feared. The enemy position disintegrated. Rock and flesh and metal turned into vapor. Men who had been firing moments before simply ceased to exist. The impact zone became a cloud of dust and debris. When it cleared, there was nothing left but scorched earth. Braddock watched in stunned silence as the Warthog pulled up, banked hard, and lined up on the second position. The aircraft moved with an elegance that seemed impossible for something so ugly. Rolling, diving, climbing, turning, every maneuver executed with the precision of a surgical instrument. The gun fired again, another position erased. Then another, each pass surgically precise. Meredith was not just shooting, she was painting, using high explosive rounds as her brush and the valley as her canvas, rewriting the tactical situation one pass at a time. The enemy began to break. Not immediately. Professional soldiers do not panic easily. But there is a difference between discipline and suicide. When your positions are being systematically destroyed by something you cannot fight back against, when your cover is being turned into your grave, even the most disciplined soldiers recognize when the battle is lost. They began to withdraw. Some tried to maintain formation. Others simply ran. Meredith hunted them all, not with malice, not with emotion, with the cold efficiency of someone doing exactly what she had been trained to do. Bring death to the enemies of her country. Bring protection to the Marines who needed it. She flew pass after pass, her fuel gauge dropping, her ammunition counter clicking down, but she did not stop, would not stop, not until every threat was neutralized, not until every Marine had a chance to live. The radio came alive with voices, Braddock calling out targets, other squad leaders marking enemy positions. The chaos of combat shifting from desperation to coordination, from dying to fighting back, from hopelessness to something that felt almost like victory. Then the warning came. Surface-to-air missile launch detected. The calm female voice of her aircraft's defensive systems, dispassionate, clinical, delivering news that meant she had seconds to live. Someone had finally brought anti-aircraft weapons into play. A shoulder-fired missile streaking toward her at supersonic speed, heat-seeking, unforgiving, the kind of weapon that turned confident pilots into burning wreckage. Meredith reacted on pure instinct, flares deployed, chaff blooming. The Warthog braking hard left, G-forces crushing her into the seat, her vision narrowing, the edges of her sight graying out as blood struggled to reach her brain. The missile corkscrewed past, close enough that she saw it, a blur of metal and fire missing her aircraft by meters. The flares had worked. The countermeasures had done their job, but there would be others. She knew that. Knew that every pass was a roll of the dice. Knew that eventually the dice would come up wrong. She keyed her radio. Voice steady despite everything. All units be advised, enemy has portable anti-air. Will continue runs but expect decreased effectiveness. Braddock's voice came back immediately. Viper, you need to pull back. You have done enough. We can maneuver now. You have given us a chance. She almost smiled, almost, but there was still work to do, still positions to clear, still Marines who needed her. Negative, Braddock, I'm staying until the job is done. Another missile launch, another desperate break. This one closer, so close that the proximity fuse nearly triggered, so close that the explosion rocked her aircraft, sent warning lights dancing across her panel, hydraulic pressure dropping, one engine showing damage indicators, but still flying, still capable, still in the fight. She made another pass. The gun roared, another enemy position obliterated, then another warning, another missile, this time from a different direction. They were coordinating, learning, adapting to her tactics. She deployed her remaining countermeasures, broke hard, pulled angles that stressed her aircraft to its limits. The missile exploded behind her, close enough to pepper her tail with shrapnel, close enough to trigger more warning lights. Fire warning in engine 2. Control degradation. The aircraft was dying beneath her, piece by piece, system by system, but not yet, not quite yet. She made one more pass, one final run. Her last ammunition spent in a sustained burst that tore through the final enemy strongpoint. The gun fell silent, empty, her fuel gauge reading minimum, her aircraft barely holding together. It was time to leave, time to limp home, time to face whatever waited for her, court-martial, discharge, the end of everything she had worked for. But 540 Marines were alive, and that was enough. She turned toward the base, started climbing. The controls felt sluggish, damaged, the Warthog responding with hesitation instead of precision. She coaxed it along, gentle inputs, patient corrections, like calming a wounded animal, talking it through the pain, through the damage, promising it just a little more, just a little further. Then we can rest. The radio crackled, Braddock's voice. Raw, emotional, the voice of a man trying to say something that had no adequate words. Viper 206. You just saved 540 lives. We owe you everything. She did not respond immediately, could not respond, because something was building in her chest, not pride, not satisfaction, something deeper. The knowledge that she had done what she was always meant to do, that all the preparation, all the lonely nights studying maps, all the simulator runs, all the doubt and dismissal and mockery. It had all led to this moment. Copy that, Braddock. She kept her voice steady, professional. Get your Marines home. The flight back was the longest of her life. Every minute stretched, every system failure a new challenge, the aircraft shaking, warning lights blazing, fuel running so low that her gauges read zero, running on fumes and prayers and the sheer stubborn refusal of the Warthog to give up. She could see the base ahead, the compound, the runway, safety. Or whatever passed for safety when you had just disobeyed direct orders and flown a mission that should have killed you. She lined up for landing, the controls barely responding. One engine out, the other running on fumes, the aircraft dropping like a brick, too fast, too steep. She eased back on the stick, flared. The main gear touched down hard, the aircraft bounced, settled, rolled. She applied brakes. The Warthog finally stopped at the end of the runway, engines sputtering, fuel exhausted. Every system in the red. It had given her everything it had, and together they had been enough. What does redemption look like? Sometimes it is loud, cheering crowds, medals pinned on chests, speeches about heroism and sacrifice, but sometimes redemption is quiet, a silence so heavy it presses down like physical weight, a silence that acknowledges what words cannot capture. Meredith shut down the engines. The sudden quiet was jarring after hours of noise. No more roar, no more vibration, just stillness. She sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands resting on the controls. Helmet still on, not quite ready to face what came next. Through the canopy she could see vehicles approaching. The flight line staff, maintenance crews and others, officers, MPs, people who would have questions, people who would have orders, people who would decide her fate. She unstrapped, climbed out of the cockpit. Her legs felt unsteady, the adrenaline draining away, leaving behind exhaustion so complete it was almost narcotic. She touched the aircraft's fuselage. Battle damage visible across the tail section, shrapnel scars, burn marks. The Warthog had taken hits meant for her, had absorbed punishment that would have destroyed lesser aircraft. It had carried her into hell and brought her back. She owed it thanks. She owed it respect. Colonel Hayes was the first to reach her, his face unreadable, a mask of military discipline that revealed nothing of what he was thinking. Meredith stood at attention, waited, prepared for whatever came next. Captain Callahan, his voice was measured, controlled. You disobeyed a direct order. You launched without authorization. You violated weather minimums and operational protocols. You endangered your aircraft and yourself. She met his eyes, did not look away. Yes, sir. And you saved 540 Marines who would otherwise be dead. Yes, sir. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Around them people were gathering. Maintenance crews, ground staff, other pilots. A crowd forming without anyone quite realizing it was forming. Captain, you will face an investigation. There will be inquiries, possibly a court-martial. I understand, sir. Hayes nodded slowly. Then his expression shifted, something softening, something human breaking through the mask of command. But that is for tomorrow. Tonight I need you to know something. He extended his hand. She took it. His grip was firm, solid. The grip of someone who understood what had happened even if he could not say it aloud. You did good work today, Captain. Exceptional work. Thank you, sir. The crowd parted, men stepping aside, and through that gap came Lieutenant Braddock. He was covered in dust and grime, caked on his uniform, eyes bloodshot from hours of combat. He looked like he had walked through hell because he had. He stopped in front of her, raised his hand in a sharp salute, held it there. The gesture was formal, precise. The kind of salute taught at military academies, but there was nothing routine about it. This salute had weight, had meaning, was the kind of gesture that would be remembered. Viper 206. His voice was formal but heavy with emotion. That valley owes you. Every man who walked out of there tonight owes you. I owe you. Behind him, Marines gathered. Helmets came off, heads bowed, whispers carried through the crowd. Low and reverent, she carried us home. Dead weight saved the battalion, no. Viper 206 saved the battalion. The silence broke into applause, not wild cheering, not celebration, something deeper, more resonant. the sound of warriors honoring something greater than themselves. Boots stomped against concrete. Hands clapped in steady rhythm. Voices murmured like hymns. Meredith did not smile, did not gloat, did not allow herself any expression of triumph. She simply lowered her eyes and spoke quietly. "I was just doing my duty, sir." Braddock held the salute a moment longer, then dropped it, extended his hand. She took it, her grip firm, the scars on her knuckles visible against his calloused palm, scars from years of training, from missions that politics had tried to edit out of her record. "The duty you were told not to do, that is the hardest kind." Hayes nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if the motion itself was an admission. "Captain, we will need to discuss the procedural implications of tonight's events. There will be inquiries, reports, investigations. I understand, sir, but that is for tomorrow." Hayes paused, something shifting in his expression. "Tonight you should know that every Marine in this compound understands what you did, and none of them will forget it." The applause continued as she walked toward the hangar, her father's dog tags tapping against her vest with each step, steady as a heartbeat. Inside the hangar, away from eyes and noise, she began her ritual, stripping the warthog down in her logs. Nodding fuel burns, cannon rounds expended, recording every detail in neat handwriting, the same handwriting that filled her kneeboard, the same handwriting that had mapped this mission before anyone believed it was possible. The numbers mattered, the method mattered, recognition was just noise. A shadow fell across the hangar doorway. She looked up. Lance Corporal Cody Luttrell stood there, still in his combat gear, dust covering every inch of him. His eyes were red, his hands shaking. He looked like a man who had seen death and been turned away at the last moment. He tried to speak, failed, tried again. "This morning, his voice cracked. Meredith watched him struggle with words that would not come. The young man who had called her, quote, a pilot, who had laughed as he walked past her on the tarmac, who had begged for his life on a radio frequency while she flew through hell to save him. She nodded once, small gesture, an acknowledgement that required no words. Then she turned back to her logs. It was all the forgiveness he needed, all the forgiveness he deserved. He stood there a moment longer, then quietly walked away, carrying a debt he would spend the rest of his life trying to repay. Hours passed. Dawn approached. The compound slowly returned to normal rhythms, but nothing was really normal anymore. Something had changed in the fundamental order of things, a truth revealed that could not be unrevealed. How do you measure the distance between who you were and who you become? In days, in missions, in the accumulation of moments that stack like bricks until you look back and realize the person you were is gone. That person exists only in memory now, a ghost of former doubts and smaller dreams. In the weeks that followed, investigations came. Officers in dress uniforms, lawyers with briefcases, men and women whose job was to examine what had happened that night in Black Ridge Valley. They studied flight logs, interviewed witnesses, reconstructed the mission minute by minute, looking for violations, looking for blame, looking for reasons to make an example out of someone who had dared to ignore procedure. Meredith sat through every interview, answered every question. Her responses were calm, factual, devoid of emotion or justification. Yes, she had disobeyed orders. Yes, she had flown in weather below minimums. Yes, she had launched without authorization. She did not offer explanations, did not plead circumstances, did not ask for understanding. The facts spoke for themselves. But the facts were complicated, because 540 Marines were alive, because Lieutenant Braddock submitted a statement that read less like testimony and more like scripture, because every man who had been in that valley wrote letters, dozens of letters, then hundreds, letters that said things the investigation could not ignore. My son is alive because of her. My husband came home because she refused to abandon him. She saved my brother when everyone else said it was impossible. The investigation stretched on. Weeks became a month, then two. The base settled into new rhythms, but those rhythms were different now. When Meredith walked across the compound, Marines saluted, not the perfunctory gestures of routine, real salutes, the kind that meant something. When she entered the chow hall, conversation stopped, not from hostility, from respect, the kind of respect that required acknowledgement. In briefings, when she raised her hand, officers called on her immediately. Her opinions were not dismissed. Her suggestions were not ignored. The lanes they had assigned her evaporated. She was no longer logistics, no longer support. She was Viper 206, the pilot who had flown through hell and brought a battalion home. First Sergeant Prout found her one afternoon near the flight line. The same man who had said she should stay in her lane, keep her on support. Don't complicate actual operations. He approached slowly, almost hesitant, a career Marine who had seen everything suddenly uncertain. Captain, his voice was rough, uncomfortable. She looked up from her kneeboard, waited. I owed you an apology weeks ago. Should have given it sooner. She said nothing. Let him work through it. I was wrong about you. We were all wrong. And those Marines in Black Ridge would be dead if we had been right. Meredith studied him for a moment, saw genuine contrition, the kind that came from confronting your own failures, from recognizing that your certainty had been built on assumptions never tested. It is forgotten, First Sergeant. Prout nodded, but they both knew it was not forgotten, could not be forgotten. Some things changed you. Some things rewrote the map of who you were. This was one of those things. The court-martial never happened. Instead, there were commendations, medals, recognition that came too late and meant too little compared to what had actually occurred. The Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal, citations that used words like extraordinary heroism and exceptional airmanship. Meredith accepted them with the same quiet discipline she had carried her entire career. No speeches, no false modesty, just simple acknowledgement and then back to work. Because medals were not why she had flown that mission. Recognition was not why she had disobeyed orders. She had done it because Marines were dying and she had the skill to save them. The decision had been that simple, the consequences complex, but the decision itself had been clarity distilled to a single point. But there was one recognition that mattered more than medals, more than commendations, more than the official acknowledgments that came with signatures and seals. It came in the form of a box. Plain cardboard, no markings, delivered to her quarters one evening by a Marine she did not recognize. Inside were letters, not official correspondence, personal letters, handwritten, some on notebook paper, some on whatever scrap the writer could find, from Marines who had been in that valley, from their families, from their children. She read them late at night when the compound was quiet. Each letter was a story. A life that continued because of one decision made in defiance of protocol. A father who would walk his daughter down the aisle. A husband who would hold his newborn son. A Marine who would finish college, get married, start a business, live a life that should have ended in dust and blood. She kept those letters in a box under her bunk, next to her father's dog tags, next to the kneeboard that had mapped a mission no one believed in. And sometimes, late at night, when sleep would not come, she would walk out to the flight line, sit beneath the wing of her Warthog, the same aircraft that had carried her into hell and back. Battle damage repaired now, ready to fly again, she would sit there in the darkness, remembering, her father at dusk lining up cans on a fence post, steady breath, ease the trigger, let the shot surprise you. She had let the shot surprise everyone, including herself, because true courage does not always roar. Sometimes it waits, quiet and steady and unseen until the moment it is needed. And when it arrives, it does not ask for recognition, does not demand applause, it simply does its duty. What becomes of a legend when it is still alive? When the person at the center of the story continues to exist, continues to work, continues to be human in ways that legends are not supposed to be. The compound changed around her. New deployments, new missions, the rhythm of war that ground forward regardless of individual moments. Marines rotated home. New units arrived. The faces changed, but the stories remained. And one story rose above all others. Told in mess halls and briefing rooms and everywhere soldiers gathered to make sense of chaos. The story of Viper 206, the pilot they had dismissed, the woman they had called dead weight, who had flown into weather that grounded everyone else, who had saved 540 Marines when protocol said to let them die. The story grew with each telling, not because it was exaggerated, but because the truth was remarkable enough. Meredith heard the whispers, saw how new arrivals looked at her. With awe, with respect, with something that made her deeply uncomfortable because it felt like worship. And she was not a saint. She was just a pilot who had made a choice that had worked out, but it could have easily ended differently. Could have ended with her aircraft scattered across a valley floor, with more death instead of less, with her memory existing only as a cautionary tale about pilots who thought they knew better than regulations. She tried to maintain normalcy. Routine, the same discipline that had defined her career, but normal was harder now because expectations followed her everywhere. When she flew, people watched. When she spoke, people listened. When she made suggestions, they were implemented. It should have felt like vindication, like justice, but mostly it felt like weight, another kind of burden, different from dismissal but burden nonetheless. Lieutenant Emma Reyes arrived with a fresh rotation. 23 years old. Newly commissioned, wide-eyed with the combination of confidence and terror that defined every junior officer's first deployment. She found Meredith one morning near the flight line, approached with visible nervousness. "Captain Callahan." Meredith looked up from her pre-flight check, waited. "I just wanted to say." Reyes hesitated, searching for words. "I joined because of you, because of Black Ridge, because you showed that." She trailed off, uncertain. Meredith felt something twist inside her, recognized the look. The hope, the assumption that she had all the answers, that she represented something larger than herself. She kept her voice gentle but firm. "You should not have joined because of me, Lieutenant. You should have joined because you wanted to serve." Reyes blinked, surprised, not offended, just recalibrating. "I meant, you showed it was possible for people like us to make a difference, people like us." The phrase hung between them, loaded with assumptions, with identity, with all the complexity of what it meant to be a woman in a profession still dominated by men who sometimes resented your presence. Meredith chose her words carefully. "Lieutenant, you will face challenges I never faced, and challenges I did. Some of those challenges will be because you are a woman. Some will be because you are new. Some will just be because this work is hard. What matters is not proving anything to anyone. What matters is being so good at your job that nothing else matters." Reyes nodded slowly, processing, then softly. "Is that what you did?" Meredith smiled slightly, bitter and amused at the same time. "I tried, but mostly I just did what needed doing when no one else would. That is not a strategy, Lieutenant. That is just stubbornness." Reyes laughed, a small sound but genuine. "Thank you, ma'am." Meredith returned to her pre-flight, but she felt the weight of that interaction, the responsibility of being someone's example, someone's reason. It was not a role she had sought, not one she necessarily wanted, but it was hers now whether she liked it or not. Months passed. The investigation concluded officially. No charges filed. No disciplinary action. Instead, a quiet note in her personnel file, an acknowledgement that sometimes regulations failed to account for reality, that military doctrine was built on past wars and could not always predict future challenges, that individual judgment still mattered, even in an institution that prized obedience above all else. Colonel Hayes called her into his office one afternoon. She reported, expecting another debrief, another discussion about procedures and implications. But Hayes simply gestured to a chair. She sat. He poured 2 cups of coffee from a battered pot that looked older than both of them, handed her one. They drank in silence for a moment. "Captain, I have been in the Corps for 32 years. Hayes spoke slowly, carefully. "I have seen a lot of things, good decisions, bad decisions, heroes and cowards and everything in between." He paused, studied her over the rim of his cup. "What you did that night, I cannot decide if it was the bravest thing I have ever witnessed or the most reckless." Meredith sipped her coffee, waited. "Maybe both, sir." Hayes laughed, genuine amusement cutting through military formality. "Definitely both." He set down his cup, leaned back. "The Corps is not good at this, at recognizing when someone sees something we miss. When someone understands that the rules we built are not adequate for every situation. We prefer order, structure, predictability." Meredith nodded, understanding where this was going. "But war is not predictable, sir. No, it is not. Which is why we need people like you. People who know the rules well enough to know when to break them." He met her eyes. "That is not an endorsement of insubordination, Captain. It is an acknowledgement that judgment matters, that experience matters, That sometimes the best decision is the one that looks wrong until it proves itself right. What are you saying, sir? Hayes smiled. Thin. I am saying that your next assignment when this deployment ends will reflect your actual capabilities, not the assumptions we made about them. You will fly combat missions. You will lead squadrons. You will do what you should have been doing from the start. She felt something release in her chest. Not relief exactly, but recognition. Vindication delayed but delivered. Thank you, sir. Do not thank me. Thank those Marines who refused to let us forget what happened. They made it impossible to keep you in logistics. He stood. She stood. Dismissed, Captain and Callahan. He paused. For what it is worth, I am glad I was wrong about you. The deployment ended, rotations processed through, orders came down, new assignments, new challenges. Meredith packed her gear with the same methodical precision she applied to everything: dog tags, kneeboard, letters from Marines who owed her their lives, the essentials of a life lived at the intersection of duty and consequence. On her last night at the compound, she walked out to the flight line one final time. Her warthog sat dark against the tarmac, waiting for the next pilot. The next mission. Aircraft had no loyalty, no memory. It was a machine, but she touched its fuselage anyway, a gesture of goodbye, of gratitude, of acknowledgement that they had been through something together, something that mattered. The stars burned overhead. The same stars her father had stared at during sleepless nights. The same stars that looked down on every battlefield in history. Indifferent, eternal, bearing witness without judgment. She stood there a long time, letting the desert night seep into her bones, remembering. Then she turned and walked away, toward whatever came next, toward a career redefined, toward challenges that would test her in new ways, but carrying with her the knowledge that when it mattered most she had been enough. One pilot, one aircraft, one decision, 540 lives. And in the end, that was all the victory anyone needed, because the measure of a person is not found in how they are perceived, not in titles or ranks or the opinions of those who never understood them. The measure of a person is found in what they do when action is required, when the easy path is also the wrong path, when duty demands more than you think you can give. Meredith Callahan had been measured, and she had not been found wanting. The Marines in Black Ridge Valley carried that truth with them, shared it, passed it down. The legend grew not through exaggeration but through repetition of simple facts. She came when no one else would. She flew through weather that should have killed her. She saved us. And somewhere in compounds and bases scattered across the world, young pilots heard that story, absorbed its lessons, understood that courage was not about being fearless. It was about acting despite fear. That competence was earned through obsessive preparation. That respect was not given but taken through performance so undeniable it silenced all criticism. And maybe, just maybe, some of them sat alone with their own kneeboards, mapping terrain they had never been assigned to study, running drills they had never been ordered to run, preparing for moments that might never come, preparing anyway, because that is what being ready means. Sometimes dignity does not speak, it simply acts.